Степанюко, Евген Андрій, наша пісня рідний стрій, ми хлопці із Канади, рушничок. Ми хлопці із Канади, гей-гей, гей-гей, не звикли до паради, гей-гей, гей-гей, бажаємо лиш одне з тим все, скромне, щире, і це все ми хлопці із Канади, гей-гей, гей-гей. Рушничок, це танок, це слова.
And welcome back to Nash Holos Ukrainian Roots Radio. I'm Pavina. That song you just heard is by a very popular Ukrainian-Canadian polka band from Montreal from back in the 1970s and 80s. They were called Rushnichuk. They left behind about 5 recordings, and one of the members of that group is now hosting the program that follows Nash Holos. And last week, I had a chance to sit down with him and have a little chat. Stefan Andrusiak is well known in the Ukrainian-Canadian community as a musician with one of Canada's iconic Zabava bands, Rushnichuk, a broadcaster with 2 of Canada's big networks, CBC and CTV, and a Ukrainian community activist and leader in his home community of London, Ontario. He's now retired, as have his fellow Rushnichuk members, but in his retirement, he's happily found a new hobby that marries his professional broadcast career past and his love of Ukrainian culture, particularly the Canadian variety. This new hobby is a radio show and podcast called Nasha Kasha, a spoken word show which is syndicated on close to 20 campus radio stations, mostly in southern Ontario, but also in BC, including Nanaimo's campus radio station, CHLY 101.7 FM. Stefan, welcome. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Hi, Paulina. I'm back.
You're back, yeah.
I'm back in the big time on Nash Holos.
Oh, wow. You're too funny. So much to talk about. Let's start with Nasha Kasha. Maybe just a bit about you first.
Well, I said that opening line jokingly, but also very, very warmly, because you ran segments that I used to produce called Rushnichuk Stories. That's what I meant by being back.
Yeah, 40 of them. They were great. They got a lot of airplay on Nash Holos, and it was really nice to see that the kind of a resurrection, not really, but it was recollection, I guess maybe would be a better word. And because, you know what I noticed with Rushnichuk online years ago, when, it was just everybody was piling on the internet, and there was this Rushnichuk fan club on Facebook, everywhere, and I thought, wow, this is great, because you guys disbanded when?
Oh my gosh, it's been decades. You know that this is the 50th anniversary of us starting as a band this year.
No way.
We played for the first time on New Year's Eve, 1969, at a restaurant called La Steppe, and they wanted to throw a New Year's party. And actually, my father was one of the partners in La Steppe, and he asked if I could bring together a few of my musician friends. And we came together and we just hit it off from the very beginning. And New Year's Eve, 1969, that was our debut. So this is the big for
That's
Urushnachok.
that's amazing. And I know you did Urushnachok's story on it, and we replayed it recently when we introduced your new show, your new hobby, Nasha Kasha, on CHLY in Nanaimo just last week.
My mother used to tell my father that you mean Fiola Maya, and whenever he got lost in a project that just overtook his passions and his concentration. And so I guess this is more than a hobby. It's my fiole, this Nasha Kasha.
So tell us at the beginning, what brought it on? You retired in, what, about 2015? And what...
Well, I worked for CTV National News as a young man fresh out of grad school, and then worked for the CBC and in Edmonton, Windsor, Ontario, Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, Toronto. And so I've seen a lot of this country, and I also taught media and ethics in London. This is what brought me to London for 5 years. And I've always wanted to not let go of reporting, because I ran newsrooms in 2 provinces, and that was great to oversee editorial skills and to work with great and talented reporters. But I'd never really lost my zest for reporting in the field. And so I was looking for a vehicle that would take me back into that kind of thing. And I don't make any money on it. There are no commercials in Nasha Kasha. I don't take money for any of the stories that I do, but it allows me to have a backstage pass to life. You think of a topic, you telephone someone, you knock on a door, and before you know it, you're speaking with someone that really in another time and space you would never meet. And that's really what fires me. That's what I want to do for as long as I can with the rest of my life. You can call it a hobby, you can call it a passion. I want to take what I did well professionally and now do it just because I love it, and where best to do it, in my case, than around the culture that I grew up in, the people, and examining issues and asking some hard questions, but also bringing some compassion and understanding. And I think I have all of those. And hence you have Nasha Kasha. Kasha is a mess. Life is a mess. It's not perfect, but it's warm and it's nourishing, and it's so good for you if you get involved in it. And that's why I call it Kasha. Nasha, just as Nash Holos is our voice, Nash Holos. Nasha Kasha, it's our Kasha. It's our little mess. And whenever I tell somebody, well, what's the name of your show, Stefan? Well, it's Nasha Kasha. It always brings a smile to people's faces.
Well, I mean, kasha is a favorite food, I think, of most Ukrainians. And it's a good name, and you've also got kind of a subtitle, though, too, don't you? Tell us about how you came up with that.
Well, you see, I came up with the thought of calling the show Kasha. And I went, as you do, you search to see that you're not using somebody else's name. And lo and behold, in Eastern Europe, there is a klezmer band, Kasha, Nasha.
Way. No way.
Yeah,
really?
and they're excellent. And I've communicated with them, and I told them about my show, and can I use your music? And they said yes. Kasha Nasha, listen to them. They're wonderful. They've even got a song called Carpathian Carnival.
No way. Wow.
Oh, beautiful klezmer music. And so I've used it on occasion.
Okay.
So that's the Nasha Kasha piece. But I also couldn't make up my mind, because I was a fan of the almanac format that Garrison Keillor, well, before he had to leave his program, performed for public radio. And I've always wanted to do an almanac kind of stories about just life. You kick back and you can have some serious issues and some serious discussions, but sometimes you laugh. And I think we need to laugh along with our neighbors and explain who it is that we are, this Ukrainian thing that we're so in love with. What's that all about? And so, just like your show, it's in the English language. Mind you, you do have Ukrainian segments in yours. I speak to a general audience. And I said to my friend who's in broadcasting, I said, I'm torn between Nasha Kasha and the idea of calling my show Ukrainian Almanac. And he says, well, call them both. Join the names. Nasha Kasha, Ukrainian Almanac.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. So it's called Nasha Kasha, Ukrainian Almanac in full, but most of my listeners know it as Nasha Kasha without the last part. And my friends and family, they say, well, how's Kasha going? So you got it all.
So tell us when it started and how.
Well, I applied to, because you do have to apply as a volunteer to the local radio station on campus at Western University. It was CHRW 94.9 FM. The corporate name is Radio Western. So I applied to Radio Western. I spoke with Andrew Barton, the station manager, and he says, yeah, sure. But you're going to have to go through all the training, even though I spent a lifetime in broadcasting and news. And I said, fine. I mean, I'm a volunteer. I've got to pass muster. And so they gave me the 9-page policy book, and I came in to take tutorials with them, and they showed me studio procedure because I didn't know that. And Andrew is a jazz and blues aficionado, and you should see this. You should see this man put a vinyl record on a turntable. It's like this act of reverence, and he's so good, and he's so knowledgeable. And as a result of hanging out with the gang at Radio Western, I have such a high opinion of the volunteers, some of whom have spent decades, like you, Paulina, doing their program dependably without, there may be a week where they're not feeling well or they're away on vacation and they'll do a rerun. But for decades, you say, oh, Stefan, you've done what is it, your 195th show? Well, that's nothing compared to the fellow who for so many years at Radio Western preceded my program, doing the Spanish show for an hour and a half every Sunday, and he was just fantastic, and he's still doing it. So more power to all of the people. And if anybody out there listening has ever wanted to do a program on, I don't know, old rock and roll LPs or some other kind of sidebar issue, go to your radio station, your community radio station, and let them know. I wanted to do an independent program because the stories that I find are more often than not people who wouldn't get a second notice from a journalist, and also they may not think their story is important enough. And I believe that everybody's got a story to tell, and it's in these little stories, in the day-to-day life worked and lived well, that I think we can all learn something from. And I don't usually play full musical pieces on my show, but I will weave in some elements that musically that would fit to reinforce the story that I'm doing.
So tell us about some of these stories. This last week was all about accordion music, and last week was judge.
Bogdan Fute is a federal court judge in the United States. He worked in Washington, D.C. He was appointed by Ronald Reagan. And the reason I look to him, other than the fact that he's of Ukrainian background and heritage, is that he has been pivotal as an advisor to Ukraine as it became independent all those years, and he's seen it go through Yushchenko and Yanukovych and now Zelensky, and he has, sometimes through legal conferences in Ukraine, sometimes through initiatives that the United States government has put together, sometimes the Ukrainian World Congress, he has been very active all the way through, and I thought he would be a fascinating subject. He's now of a retirement age, but he still works as a judge 3 days a week. It's really quite fascinating. So I look at a character like that, and I use that term fondly, and with respect. And I think, well, I've got some questions to ask. And so I did a profile of him. The one that you refer to as an accordion, I reflected on my youth, my tortured youth, not wanting to learn the accordion, and how my father had different ideas, and how I eventually became a drummer, and how he and I made peace, And not only that, he loved the music that I was a part of, and that grew into Rushnichok. I was the drummer for Rushnichok for, we only had 4 members. Andriy passed away last June.
That was
so
sad.
there are now three of us. Yeah, he didn't get to see the 50th anniversary of our band, which started New Year's Eve, 1969 in Montreal at a club called La Steppe.
So that was the 2 stories so far that have aired in Nanaimo. Some of the other stories, though, the other 193, and then maybe the ones that you're looking for in the future. Tell us a little bit about those.
Well, I'll tell you the ones that I did in British Columbia. Larissa and I took a week and a cheap flight. Swoop flies from, this is not a commercial, but it flies directly from London, Ontario, where I live, to Abbotsford, BC. And I thought,
wow,
heck, let's just do this. And I flew to Abbotsford. Why Abbotsford? Because Nasha Kasha is heard on CIVL FM in Abbotsford.
Perfect.
And so I landed there, and they had a country fair, and I went to the country fair with my microphone, and I said, hey, I do this show, would you let me in? And they said, yes, come on in. And I walked over to the food concession, and there was this lady with a food truck, and she sold pierogies, and she was from Chilliwack, and she'd been doing it for 20 years.
Of course there was.
She was selling her truck, and I said, that's a story. and so we went up north to Kamloops, and we met with the Pokotilo Ukrainian dancers. And I didn't know what a Pokotilo was, but it's a tumbleweed.
Oh.
And Kamloops has tumbleweeds. On the roads, you'll see them. Although in British Columbia, it has a desert-like climate. And so I met the Pocatello dancers, and I did a story about them. And we went to Vernon, and I did a story about someone who was interested in Ukrainian grave sites. And why was she interested? Well, because an ancestor of hers was an internee at the infamous internment camps that Ukrainians were sent to as prisoners during World War I for no other reason than they were of Ukrainian descent, and they held an Austrian passport. Why did they hold an Austrian passport? Which was the enemy. They held an Austrian passport because that part of Ukraine they were from was under Austria's rule when they emigrated. It had nothing to do with the war, but they were interned. So I did a story. I did a story in Vernon, and then we went to Kelowna and another dance group there, and then to Penticton. And I didn't have anything set up, so we pull in and into our motel room, and I'm looking at the newspaper, and I said, Larissa, and she rolls her eyes. She knows that look. I go, oh, Larissa, how would you like to go to a gospel revival tonight? She goes, what? There was a Seventh-day Adventist church in Penticton, just a few blocks from our hotel, and they were hosting the Malachenko Gospel Singers, a family that grew up in Saskatchewan. The father had such a good voice that he was discovered by a religious broadcaster in the U.S., was brought to Los Angeles in the days of live radio, and eventually he brought his entire family up to be singers. And they gave me a wonderful interview, And then down to Oliver, which is just south of Penticton, to a winery called Stoneboat. And I thought a stone boat was a concrete boat. I know people do build concrete boats. And, you
didn't grow up on the prairies then.
No, well, but you know what a stone boat is, and I didn't. Now I do. A stone boat is what's pulled by horses, and people who did the back-breaking labor of clearing fields would put rocks on the back of into this thing they called a boat. And until they felt, well, this isn't fair to the horse anymore, they take it to the side of the field, dump the rocks, and then come back and keep going. And he grew up on such a farm. He was proud of his heritage, and he named his winery Stoneboat, and they now win awards for their wines. So again, I don't take money for the stories I do. It just happened that there was a winery And these were interesting people, and I thought their voices should be heard.
Well, fascinating stories, and you've got coming up to 200 of them, and sounds like you'll be having many, many more. So for those that have just tuned in now, haven't heard of Nash Akasha, how can they find you online? Because you've got, all these are archived, right?
They are. Nash Akasha has a Facebook page, and they are there. So the links are there.
Mm-hmm.
You click them and you can hear the stories, or they're on iTunes and many other podcast providers. Go to the Apple iTunes store, type in Nash Akasha, and you can subscribe for free, and you'll get, every week you'll get the Nash Akasha episode.
Perfect.
Or, better still, listen to
CHLY.
Yes.
Comes right after Nash Holos at 12:30 Wednesdays. Nash Holos starts at 11, from 11 to 12:30. So it's a great marriage. Two great names, I think. And
well, Paulina, I'm so privileged that you would think to hook up with me in this way.
Well, why not?
You've been doing this for what, 3 decades, maybe longer?
Yeah, It's 30 years since Nash Holos started.
Yeah. So congratulations on that. And I think it will work very, very well.
Yeah. So again, it's Nash Akasha, and you can search for it on iTunes, search for it on Facebook, any of your podcast apps. You do have an RSS feed, so people can find the feed. All they have to do is search for it. So
yes, they can do that.
Okay, and hopefully next time you're on the West Coast, you'll pop into Nanaimo. Try to make it on a Wednesday and come in and sit in on the studio with us and do some live radio again.
Well, Larissa has a conference in Vancouver in late March, at the end of March. I plan to come down with her, and I hope to come to Nanaimo to see you.
Perfect. Oh, that would be just awesome. And Rushnichuk, of course, with Komarik the Mosquito. And we started out with Canada's Rushnichuk, their theme song. На жаль, ми вже скінчили нашу програму, вже час додому і сказати до побачення. Але перед тим я хочу залишити вас такими словами мудрості. Добре слово робить багато. And our proverb of the week translates as, a good word does a great deal of work. You've been listening to Nash Holos Ukrainian Roots Radio here on CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Please stay with us as Stefan Andrusiak joins us with Nasha Kasha. Meanwhile, please join Oksana and me here again next Wednesday from 11 a.m. till 12:30. And until then, do stay in touch with both of us on Facebook and Twitter. And make sure to visit the Nash Holos website for audio files and transcripts, a link to our podcast, and other information about the show, and that's www.nashholos.com. You can also find Nash Holos on Mixcloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcast places, and of course, on your favorite podcast app. So stay tuned next for Nasha Kasha, followed by Wellness Wednesday to learn how to be healthy naturally. I'm Pavlina on behalf of Oksana and myself, and all of us here at CHLY 101.7 FM. Thanks so much for listening. Do Zusrichi.